You think you know what betrayal is? You know nothing. I thought the reason I was kicked out was something I had done. But when my husband threw me onto the street, the real reason was lying right there, on our pillow. Handwritten in the script I would recognize anywhere. It was a love letter, but it was also a death sentence for my marriage. And the person who wrote it wasn't my husband, ... It was his brother. And what he wrote. It was dirty, it was obscene. He wrote, "He will never touch you the way I will. If you tell, I tell our secret." I was on the street, ruined. And all because my brother-in-law had an unhealthy obsession with me. Do you want to know what we did? Stay tuned. You think you know what betrayal is? You know nothing. I thought the reason I was kicked out was something I had done. But when my husband threw me onto the street, the real reason was lying right there on our pillow. Handwritten in the script I would recognize anywhere. It was a love letter, but it was also a death sentence for my marriage. And the person who wrote it wasn't my husband, ... It was his brother. And what he wrote, it was dirty, it was obscene. He wrote, "He will never touch you the way I will. If you tell, I tell our secret." I was on the street, ruined. And all because my brother-in-law had an unhealthy obsession with me. It all culminated on a Tuesday afternoon. Mark came home early, his face a mask of stone I'd never seen before, and without a single word of explanation, he shoved a small duffel bag toward me, saying only, "You need to leave, now." The betrayal cut deeper than any knife, but the confusion was paralyzing. I begged, I pleaded, demanding to know what I had done to deserve such a cold, immediate dismissal from the man I swore forever to. He wouldn't meet my eyes, simply repeating the devastating command until I finally crumpled, too broken to fight the sudden, cruel rejection. I collapsed onto the bed we shared, the mattress still bearing the imprint of our last normal morning, just trying to process the catastrophic end of my entire life in 10 minutes flat. That's when my fingers brushed against something hard and folded beneath my pillow, a single piece of heavy parchment contrasting sharply against the white cotton. My heart hammered against my ribs, cold dread washing over me as I unfolded the note, recognizing the bold, arrogant handwriting of Ethan immediately. It was the handwriting of the man who'd always made my skin crawl. My blood ran cold as I read the first line, a line that immediately shattered any hope I had of a clean break, and exposed the terrifying truth behind Mark's sudden cruelty. "He will never touch you the way I will." The words were an obscene declaration, a claim of ownership that turned my stomach and made me realize Mark's rejection wasn't about me at all. It was about his brother, the dark, insidious secret that had clearly poisoned our marriage from the inside out, consuming Mark's conscience. The note continued, a chilling cocktail of desire and threat, solidifying my place as a terrified pawn in their twisted sibling rivalry. Ethan had scribbled the final, soul-crushing sentences that not only explained my eviction, but trapped me in a nightmare of his making. "If you tell, I tell our secret. Your husband will hate you." It was a clear, devastating message. Mark hadn't just thrown me out. He was sacrificing me to protect the fragile peace or his own dignity against his terrifying, obsessive brother. That single piece of paper left as a trophy on my marital bed was the real reason Mark had thrown away 5 years of marriage without a single glance back. I wasn't just heartbroken. I was terrified, realizing I wasn't free, but bound by a secret that could ruin not just my reputation, but my life, and that the nightmare was only just beginning. Subscribe and turn on notifications because you might relate to this story. I reread Ethan's note, my vision blurring with tears of pure terror, and the narcissism radiating from that single sheet of paper made my hands shake even harder. It wasn't enough for him to simply desire me. He needed me to know that his desire was superior to his own brother's. Turning our intimate life into a pathetic competition, he felt entitled to win. The sheer arrogance of leaving that twisted confession on our pillow in our bed showed he felt untouchable, believing his power over Mark was absolute, and that I was nothing more than a prize to be claimed once the current owner had been discarded. I rushed out of the house, grabbing only the duffel bag and clutching the venomous note like a lifeline, desperate to put distance between myself and the man I now barely recognized as my husband, and the house that felt utterly contaminated by Ethan's presence. I drove aimlessly through the quiet, leafy streets of Charlottesville, the picturesque scenery contrasting sharply with the internal horror of realizing how blind I'd been to the growing darkness surrounding me. Ethan wasn't just a weird brother-in-law. He was a meticulous, calculating architect of my destruction. And Mark was either too weak or too complicit to stop him from destroying our life together. As I sped down the road toward the highway, my thoughts spiraled back over the last few months, and the little incidents that I had foolishly dismissed as quirks suddenly slotted into place with horrifying clarity. There was the time he accidentally showed up at my gym, the time he knew my favorite coffee order at a place I rarely visited, and the way his eyes always followed me across the room during family dinners. A slow, invasive scan that used to make the hairs on my arms stand up. That wasn't just crush. That was the systematic surveillance of a predator claiming his territory. I finally pulled into a cheap motel parking lot outside of town, the kind of place with flickering neon signs, because I didn't dare go to a friend's house, knowing Ethan was likely watching my every move, enjoying the panic he'd orchestrated. The thought of confronting Mark was useless. The note proved he had already chosen the path of least resistance, appeasing his obsessive brother by sacrificing his wife, a profound moral failure that shattered every vow we had ever exchanged. He valued his reputation and his brother's silence more than he valued me, the ultimate narcissistic act of self-preservation. Seriously, I'd like to know if anyone would have done things differently, because I still feel guilty to this day. I was entirely alone, terrified, and trapped by a vague yet potent threat of a secret that I couldn't even fully recall, yet knew in my bones was real and utterly damning. The entire dynamic reeked of toxicity, Ethan's controlling obsession, Mark's spineless compliance, and me caught in the middle of a war one never signed up for, now forced to flee like a criminal from my own home. My first priority wasn't healing, it was survival and figuring out what terrifying hold Ethan actually had over his brother. I had to understand the extent of this dark fixation, because that note wasn't just a goodbye. It was a terrifying promise that he wasn't done with me yet, and the knowledge that I was now fully exposed to his dangerous, controlling gaze made my stomach clench with fear. The sterile, impersonal walls of the motel room offered no comfort. Only a stark backdrop for the chaos consuming my mind, and I spent hours pacing the thin carpet trying to unravel the tangled, toxic web Ethan had spun around our lives. I knew the root of the problem wasn't just Ethan's desire. It was the unshakable, almost unnatural hold he had over Mark, a power dynamic that had been silently suffocating my marriage long before the note appeared. Mark, the sharp, confident investment banker, became instantly subservient and nervous whenever his younger brother entered the room, a change in personality I had always rationalized as sibling rivalry. But this was deeper than rivalry. It was a complex system of manipulation, a toxic codependence where Ethan, the narcissistic younger brother, dictated the terms of Mark's emotional and professional life. Mark had once confessed that Ethan was the one who had convinced their father to fund Mark's first, crucial investment venture, making Ethan the secret architect of Mark's success, a debt Mark felt bound to repay, perhaps indefinitely, through silence and obedience. This financial leverage was likely the dark secret fueling Ethan's supreme confidence and his belief that he could command Mark to destroy his own marriage. I desperately searched my memories for the secret Ethan threatened to reveal, the one that made Mark sacrifice me so brutally. Was it professional fraud? Something related to that initial investment? Or was it something personal, something Mark had done in the past that Ethan had meticulously stored away, waiting for the perfect moment to deploy as blackmail? The vagueness of the threat was a brilliant stroke of psychological warfare, keeping me paralyzed by fear of the unknown consequences. I finally managed to call my best friend, Sarah, choking out the bare essentials of the story while carefully omitting the truly obscene details of the note, afraid to even speak Ethan's twisted desires aloud. Sarah, bless her soul, was immediately furious and demanded to know where I was, her voice ringing with protective outrage, but I refused to tell her the motel location. My paranoia about Ethan's surveillance now reaching fever pitch, I couldn't risk putting her in his calculating, obsessive crosshairs. As the motel room light buzzed ominously, casting long, unsettling shadows, I realized the full, terrifying extent of Ethan's narcissism He hadn't just wanted me out of the house. He wanted me vulnerable. He wanted me isolated, panicked, and utterly dependent on keeping his dangerous secret, thereby transferring Mark's subservience directly onto me. He was playing a long, cold game, and my sudden homelessness was merely the opening move in his horrifying plan to acquire me, regardless of the emotional wreckage left behind. I had to get smart, I had to stop running, and I needed to understand the exact nature of the weapon Ethan held over Mark, the secret that bought him the right to ruin people's lives. My next move couldn't be driven by fear. It had to be driven by cold, calculating determination if I ever hoped to escape the suffocating reach of the obsessed brother. The next morning, driven by a need for control, I bought a burner phone from a big box store 15 miles away, paying in cash and feeling ridiculously conspicuous. But the paranoia was a necessary shield against Ethan's known surveillance tactics. I desperately needed to know if he had moved into the house immediately, symbolically taking my place, or if he was simply waiting in the shadows, enjoying the chaos he had created while plotting his next move. My first call on the secure line was to our former housekeeper, Maria, whom I knew cherished her privacy and would never betray my trust for either Mark or Ethan. Maria confirmed my worst fears in a hushed, nervous whisper. Mark had barricaded himself inside the house, not answering calls, and he looked pale and haunted, clearly crumbling under the immense psychological pressure Ethan was exerting. Worse, she reported that Ethan had been parking his sleek, black Mercedes down the street every evening, sitting there for hours, his presence an oppressive, silent declaration of ownership over the entire property and the miserable man inside. He wasn't just obsessed with me. He was obsessively controlling the outcome of his scheme. This confirmed the narcissistic pattern. Mark was being punished and isolated for his failure to perfectly execute the kick-out, while Ethan maintained a physical vigil, ensuring no one, especially me, dared to trespass on his emotional territory. The image of Ethan sitting in his luxury car, watching the house like a cold, calculating king surveying his conquered kingdom, sent a fresh wave of sick dread through me. He was enjoying my fear, thriving on the powerlessness he had inflicted upon us both. I spent the next 2 days in that depressing motel reviewing every single interaction I'd ever had with Ethan, trying to pinpoint the exact moment his fixation turned from strange to dangerous. I remembered an incident at a family barbecue almost a year ago where he'd cornered me, complimenting my dress with an intensity that felt predatory, and when I politely excused myself, he'd muttered, "You won't be able to ignore me forever, my name." I had laughed it off then, dismissing it as Ethan being his usual weird self, but now the memory tasted like ash and signaled the start of his covert operation. I realized then that the obsession wasn't just physical attraction. It was about possession and domination, a need to acquire what belonged to his more successful older brother, a textbook display of extreme narcissistic entitlement. If I was Mark's wife, Ethan felt entitled to me, simply because he believed he was smarter, darker, and more deserving of the spoils of Mark's life. He didn't want a relationship. He wanted a trophy taken directly from his brother's display case. The realization forced me to change my strategy from hiding to preparing. I couldn't run from an obsession this deep. I needed evidence, leverage, something to break the toxic hold Ethan had over Mark, or else I would spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, constantly afraid of the dark promise left on that note. I swear I stopped here and thought, is it my fault? Comment what you would do. I need to understand if I'm wrong. The motel room, with its cheap linens and pervasive scent of stale air, had become a mental prison, a place where fear festered, and I finally decided that the only way to break Ethan's controlling grip was to face the center of the storm. I planned a forbidden return to the house in Charlottesville, a quick, covert mission driven by the desperate hope of finding the file, the email, or the piece of evidence that constituted the secret Ethan was using to blackmail Mark into compliance. If I could expose the leverage, Ethan's power over both of us would crumble, leaving his toxic obsession exposed to the light. I waited until late Saturday night, knowing Ethan often spent his weekends at a lakeside cabin property owned by his family, giving me a small window of opportunity to slip past his surveillance. Dressed in dark clothes and wearing a borrowed baseball cap pulled low over my eyes, I drove Mark's old, discreet sedan, which I had thankfully kept registered in my name back, toward the familiar neighborhood, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The familiar sight of our once welcoming home, now standing dark and oppressive under the moonlight, sent a shiver of fear and deep sadness through my core. Parking several blocks away, I approached the back fence, heart pounding a rapid tattoo against my ribs, and used the hidden key I had kept for emergency access to the kitchen door. The house was cold and utterly silent, an unnatural quiet that amplified the sound of my own anxious breathing, signaling Mark's continued absence or his deep retreat into self-pity and isolation. The air felt heavy, tainted by the toxic decisions made within those walls, turning the place I once loved into a dark, hostile environment where I was now an intruder. My immediate target was Mark's private study, the room where he kept his business files, and, crucially, the secure laptop where he handled all sensitive, confidential correspondence, the most likely place to store a devastating secret. As I crept up the stairs, every floorboard creaking beneath my weight sounded like a gunshot in the oppressive silence, and I imagined Ethan's smug face watching me from the darkness, enjoying my terror and the realization that his obsession had made me an outcast in my own home. I reached the study door, my hands clammy with sweat, and found it locked in new development, clearly Mark's desperate, inadequate attempt to protect himself, or perhaps to protect the secret from me. This forced me to face the harsh reality. Mark was actively choosing his brother's silence and complicity over his loyalty to me, an act of betrayal far deeper and more insidious than I had ever imagined. Staring at the locked study door, the cold brass knob mocking my desperation, I realized Mark's compliance was complete. He had sealed off the one place I might find the blackmail material, effectively locking me out of the truth. Frustrated and defeated, I slowly backed away from the study, deciding to check the main bedroom one last time for any physical clues, any sign of the secret, or even an indication of Mark's current whereabouts. It was a long shot, but I felt compelled to see the place where the note had been left, where my life had imploded. I cautiously pushed open the heavy oak door to the master bedroom, the room we had shared for years, and a low, guttural gasp escaped my lips at the sight that greeted me. It was entirely different, transformed into a chilling, unfamiliar space. The scent of Mark's usual cologne was replaced by a foreign, musky scent that I instantly recognized as Ethan's, a heavy, invading aroma that made the air feel suffocating and entirely too intimate. My blood ran cold, fear tightening its icy grip around my chest as I realized the sickening implication of the rearranged room. The transformation was subtle but terrifying, the hallmark of his narcissistic takeover. My side of the closet was empty, scrubby clean, and several of Ethan's luxurious, monogrammed silk shirts were now hanging prominently on Mark's side, an aggressive display of dominance and territory. More disturbing was the small bedside table where I used to keep my lotions. It now held a single framed photograph, not of me, or even of Mark, but a large, unsettlingly intimate picture of Ethan and Mark from their college years, positioned like a sacred object. Then I saw it. Displayed on Mark's formerly pristine dresser were 3 empty, glass bottles of the exact perfume I had always worn, a custom, rare scent I only bought online. They were lined up perfectly, like trophies or relics on a shrine, meticulously clean and arranged as if by a curator of a museum dedicated to me. The sight of those bottles, coupled with Ethan's scent and clothing, sent a fresh wave of panic through me, confirming the severity of his obsession had escalated far beyond simple notes and threats. The entire room was a physical manifestation of Ethan's psychological invasion, a sickening, silent boast that he wasn't just desiring me or blackmailing Mark. He was actively dismantling my life and erecting his own dark claim in the void. He had physically moved in, establishing a toxic, permanent presence right where I used to sleep, turning my marital sanctuary into his own personal headquarters of obsession and domination. The locked door to the secret felt insignificant now. The biggest, most terrifying revelation was standing right in front of me. Ethan had completely moved in, and his toxic presence meant my chance to find evidence had just become infinitely more dangerous. The oppressive atmosphere of the master bedroom, thick with Ethan's scent and the visual evidence of his narcissistic takeover, was suffocating, and I knew I had mere minutes before Mark, or perhaps even Ethan himself, might return. I was about to turn and run when my eyes caught an anomaly. The corner of a small, leather-bound book peeking out from beneath the dust ruffle of the king-sized bed, clearly hastily kicked out of sight. Driven by a desperate, reckless curiosity, I dropped to my knees, pulling the book out into the pale moonlight filtering through the window. It wasn't just a book. It was Mark's old journal, the one he claimed he stopped writing in shortly after we got engaged, filled with private thoughts and fears, a sudden and unexpected trove of potential information. My hands trembled as I flipped through the worn pages, finding entries in Mark's familiar, messy handwriting that confirmed he hadn't stopped writing. He had simply been hiding his most recent, troubling thoughts from me, thoughts that were clearly centered around his brother. The pages chronicled a man slowly unraveling under extreme emotional duress. The early entries were dark, filled with Mark's increasing anxiety about their shared business dealings, hinting vaguely at an ethical compromise they had made years ago to secure funding for his career, the very secret Ethan was likely using as leverage. But as I flipped deeper into the journal, the entries became intensely personal and overwhelmingly focused on Ethan's escalating behavior, documenting the unsettling ways he had begun invading our privacy and crossing unspoken boundaries I hadn't even noticed. There was an entry from 3 months ago that gelled my blood. Mark detailed finding a small, high-quality microphone taped underneath our dining table, confirming the paranoia I had foolishly dismissed as my own anxiety. He hadn't confronted Ethan. Instead, he wrote about the suffocating fear of exposing his brother's toxic methods, worried that any resistance would only prompt Ethan to use the business secret against him, shattering his entire professional life in one vengeful move. My heart ached with a profound mix of pity and rage-pity for the cornered man Mark had become, and rage that he had allowed Ethan's obsession and his own career fear to supersede his marriage vows and our shared life. He knew his brother was dangerous. He knew I was being stalked, yet he chose silence and compliance, effectively turning me into a sacrificial lamb for his ambition. I quickly tore out the few pages detailing the financial compromise and the discovery of the microphone, the only hard evidence I could carry, and quietly tucked the journal back under the bed, leaving the rest of the agonizing confession for Mark to find. The evidence confirmed the dark truth. My husband had chosen his career over my safety, and the most devastating betrayal was that he had known about the extent of Ethan's dark surveillance all along. Clutching the folded journal pages, the only physical evidence of Ethan's toxic manipulation and Mark's betrayal, I moved quickly toward the kitchen door, desperate to leave the house before the obsessive brother or the terrified husband returned. The adrenaline pumping through my veins masked the grief, replacing it with a laser-like focus on escape. But the sudden sound of a car crunching gravel in the driveway froze me dead in my tracks. It wasn't Mark's sensible sedan. It was the low rumble of Ethan's powerful black Mercedes. My heart seized up in my chest. My window of opportunity had slammed shut, and I was now trapped inside the house, standing just feet away from the kitchen where he was about to enter. The thought of facing Ethan now, holding the evidence of his surveillance and his brother's weakness, sent a sickening wave of fear through me. He was a narcissist who thrived on control, and catching me trespassing would give him all the power and validation his dark ego craved, likely leading to a confrontation that would be dangerous and perhaps violent. I bolted silently across the kitchen floor, my bare feet padding softly on the cold tile, and desperately slipped into the small, rarely used utility closet located just off the main laundry room. The space was cramped, smelling of detergent and dust, but it offered immediate concealment, and I pressed myself against the back wall, barely daring to breathe as the front door handle rattled violently, followed by the heavy, measured footsteps of Ethan entering the foyer. He wasn't speaking. He was simply moving with an ominous, deliberate pace, and I could hear him dropping keys onto the console table, a sharp, metallic sound that amplified the tension in the small closet. He was clearly conducting a quick survey of the house, perhaps checking if Mark was home or simply ensuring his new domain was secure after his weekend away at the lake. The silence was agonizing, punctuated only by the pounding of my own terror-stricken heart and the quiet creak of his expensive leather shoes on the hardwood floor. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped, and I heard him pause right outside the closet door, his presence an overwhelming toxic pressure radiating through the thin wood paneling. I squeezed my eyes shut, mentally preparing for the moment he would inevitably fling the door open, his cruel smile confirming he had known I was there all along, the ultimate climax of his obsessive game. He lingered there for what felt like an eternity, and the air thickened with the sheer force of his intrusive, dominating personality. Just when I thought I couldn't endure the silence a second longer, the footsteps slowly moved away, toward the master bedroom upstairs, likely to check on his new shrine and continue his psychological manipulation of Mark, who was still nowhere to be seen. I waited 3 more agonizing minutes, shaking uncontrollably, before quietly easing the closet door open, knowing I had mere seconds to escape the house before his attention shifted downstairs again. I slipped out of the house like a ghost, adrenaline overriding my fear, and sprinted down the driveway, desperate to reach Mark's inconspicuous sedan parked several blocks away, praying Ethan wouldn't look out the master bedroom window. The cool night air hit my face, a stark contrast to the stifling, toxic atmosphere of the house, and I was so focused on escaping Ethan's immediate vicinity that I failed to notice the familiar figure stepping out of a shadow near the curb. I practically collided with her, gasping in terror, only to look up and realize it was Maria, our former housekeeper, who was standing there, clutching a small grocery bag, her face etched with profound worry. Her eyes were wide with shock, recognizing me instantly despite my dark clothing and disheveled state, and she quickly pulled me toward the cover of a thick, overgrown hedge, her protective instincts immediately taking over. Maria's presence was both a relief and a terrifying complication, as her involvement now put her in Ethan's dangerous crosshairs. "Mrs., your name, what are you doing here?" She whispered urgently in a mix of Spanish and English, her voice trembling. "I saw Ethan's car pull up. You must leave now." I quickly explained in rapid, hushed tones that I had returned for some papers, but I couldn't bring myself to reveal the full, shocking truth of Ethan's note and the dark contents of Mark's journal, wanting to protect her from the sheer obscenity of the situation. Maria looked genuinely frightened, pulling me closer and confirming my initial suspicions about the escalating toxic dynamic in the house. She revealed that Mark was barely eating, locked in the den and drinking heavily, refusing to talk to anyone, and that Ethan was acting like the true master of the house, treating Maria and the gardener with haughty arrogance, the quintessential narcissist enjoying his reign. She added one crucial, chilling detail. Ethan had been demanding to know if Maria had seen me, asking about my movements and my state of mind with disturbing, proprietary interest. "He is asking too many questions, like he owns you," Maria whispered fiercely, her eyes darting toward the house, confirming the pervasive nature of his obsession. "He wants to know where you are. He's waiting for you to call him." The realization hit me hard. Ethan hadn't just thrown me out. He had left me in a state of chaos and isolation, precisely so he could step in as my savior and controller when I finally broke down and reached out for help. I thanked Maria profusely, promising to contact her soon on a secure line, and begged her to remain silent about our accidental meeting, emphasizing that her safety depended on her discretion. As I finally reached the safety of the car, speeding away from the house, I knew that my journey wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about exposing the toxic, dangerous game Ethan was playing before he ensnared someone else. Back at the safety of the anonymous motel, the sense of dread was replaced by a cold, focused determination as I finally spread out the torn pages from Mark's journal on the desk. The evidence was damning. There were Mark's frantic scribbles detailing the financial compromise, something about fraudulently inflating asset values to secure the initial seed money for his investment firm, and the subsequent entry describing the tiny microphone Ethan had planted in our home. I felt physically sick realizing the depth of the deception and the extent of Ethan's calculated toxicity. The language Mark used to describe the financial deal was vague, relying on coded names and dates, clearly designed to protect himself even from his own journal. But the urgency in his writing screamed illegality and professional ruin. This wasn't just poor judgment. This was a serious white-collar crime, and Ethan, his younger brother, held the documented proof, giving him absolute power over Mark's future, his career, and ultimately, his marital loyalty. The revelation about the surveillance microphone was the most terrifying aspect, confirming that Ethan's obsession was not passive, but actively intrusive and profoundly violating. He hadn't just been watching me from afar. He'd been listening to our private conversations, perhaps for months, gathering intimate knowledge to use as psychological ammunition or, worse, confirming details for the secret he threatened to reveal in his disgusting note. It was the ultimate narcissistic power trip, invading our marriage to dismantle it from the inside out. I needed professional help, but I couldn't risk going to the police with just these torn pages, especially without knowing the full extent of the financial crime or the secret that was potentially much worse. I needed an ally who understood the dark undercurrents of corporate finance and legal leverage, someone who could help me decode the journal's cryptic entries without immediately exposing me to the legal dangers that now surrounded my estranged husband. After agonizing over the risks, I thought of Liam Hayes, an old college friend of Mark's, a brilliant, discreet lawyer who had always seemed skeptical of Ethan's rapid financial success, and who operated a small, highly confidential firm in Richmond, Virginia. The risks were enormous, but Liam was my best shot at figuring out the actual terms of the blackmail and formulating a defense against the narcissistic predator who had stolen my life. I tucked the journal pages into a secure envelope, knowing that reaching out to Liam would be the biggest risk yet, thrusting me directly into the legal and ethical mess Mark had created. But facing down the complex web of blackmail and toxic, obsession was the only path back to reclaiming my freedom and exposing Ethan's dark game. The drive from Charlottesville to Richmond felt endless, fueled by fear and a grim determination to meet Liam Hayes, the one person who could potentially untangle the toxic legal knot Ethan had tied around Mark's career and, by extension, my life. I met Liam in his discreet upscale office tucked away in a historic building downtown, and his initial reaction upon seeing the crumpled, tear-stained journal pages ranged from professional skepticism to open-mouthed shock. He poured me a glass of water, his eyes scanning the fragments of Mark's panicked handwriting, confirming the seriousness of the ethical breaches. Liam, who had always possessed a sharp analytical mind, quickly deciphered the cryptic financial notations, confirming that Mark and Ethan had indeed committed securities fraud during the initial funding round, a crime severe enough to ruin Mark's reputation and land him in federal prison. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. My husband hadn't just sacrificed me. He was protecting a massive felony that his younger brother, the consummate narcissist, had engineered and now leveraged for complete control. Ethan's game was not just about obsession. It was about criminal power. The revelation about the illegal microphone further cemented Ethan's predatory, toxic behavior, proving he was not just a blackmailer but an active stalker, systematically dismantling my marriage through surveillance and fear. Liam's face hardened as he realized the dual nature of the threat, one legal, one psychological, and he assured me that Ethan's actions were textbook extortion and a severe invasion of privacy, giving me strong legal grounds against him should I choose to pursue them. Liam explained that my position was incredibly precarious. If Mark went down for the fraud, the collateral damage would destroy my financial security and possibly compromise me as an accomplice, simply by association. But if I exposed Ethan's blackmail and obsession, I could potentially gain immunity by cooperating, while simultaneously exposing the truly dark reason for my abrupt, cruel abandonment by Mark. We spent the rest of the meeting strategizing, Liam stressing the critical need for a paper trail documenting Ethan's psychological abuse and my attempts to uncover the truth, which led to a dangerous realization. The only real evidence of Ethan's obsession, the obscene note, was still in my duffel bag, a piece of emotional evidence that could make all the difference in court. I realized that my most personal trauma was also my strongest shield against Ethan. I left Liam's office with a complex, terrifying plan. I had to gather more concrete evidence of Ethan's surveillance and his current control over Mark, a task that would require me to risk direct contact with the monster and push my emotional boundaries to the absolute limit. The fight had officially moved from surviving a toxic divorce to surviving a high-stakes legal and psychological war against a dangerous narcissist. After my meeting with Liam, the need for solid evidence of Ethan's continued harassment became paramount. So I had to do the unthinkable, initiate contact, but on my terms, using the burner phone to document his narcissistic tendencies and expose the scope of his toxic obsession. The goal was simple yet terrifying: elicit an admission of his motive or his control over Mark. I knew the moment I pushed send, I would be inviting the predator back into my life, but it was a necessary calculated risk for my freedom. I crafted a brief, seemingly desperate text message designed to appeal directly to his massive ego and his perceived ownership over me. Something short and vulnerable that would instantly trigger his need to dominate. I saw the note. "I'm alone and scared. What do you want from me?" It was a painful performance, but I needed him to drop the blackmail facade and reveal the dark, twisted core of his personal obsession, which was my best defense. The reply was instantaneous, proving he had been waiting by his phone, confirming Maria's report that he was monitoring me remotely. His text wasn't a threat about the secret, but a chilling confirmation of his predatory desire, sent with the supreme confidence of a man who believed he had already won. "What I want is what's mine. You belong with me, not with him." Let's talk about our secret. Where are you? The use of "our secret" and "belong" was the ultimate narcissistic display of entitlement. His toxic response gave me the documentation I needed, but it also reinforced the immediate danger I was in, making it clear he saw me as a piece of property to be claimed, not a person. I quickly deleted the text thread and powered off the burner phone, my hands shaking from the sheer audacity of his possessiveness. But the brief exchange confirmed the terrifying truth. The criminal blackmail was just the tool. The obsession was the motive. I immediately contacted Liam, forwarding the screenshots from the burner phone's memory before destroying the phone entirely, giving him documented proof of Ethan's psychological coercion and the aggressive pursuit that had led to my eviction. Liam agreed that the text was a powerful piece of evidence, framing the entire situation not just as a financial crime, but as a dangerous case of stalking and emotional abuse, strengthening my legal standing considerably. But the final insidious realization was that Ethan had won the short game. He had forced me to reach out, feeding his narcissistic need for control, and now he knew I was terrified and alone. This short interaction meant he would escalate his surveillance, believing he was now closing in on his prize, forcing me to become even more cautious and strategic in my next, most dangerous step. Just as I started to feel a fragile sense of control, bolstered by the new evidence provided to Liam, Ethan delivered a cold, calculated strike aimed directly at my small support system. Maria, the kind housekeeper who had given me crucial information and risked her job, called me on the burner line, her voice tight with panic and tears. She hadn't been fired. Ethan had done something far more toxic and insidious, something designed to isolate me further and demonstrate the terrifying reach of his obsession. Maria revealed that when she showed up for work that morning, Ethan was waiting for her, not with anger, but with a sickeningly sweet smile and an envelope stuffed with cash far more than she would earn in a month. He told her she deserved a long vacation for her loyalty, but the true message was delivered without words. He knew she was helping me, and the money was a chilling payoff for her immediate, permanent silence. He was buying her discretion with a bribe, subtly turning her help into a form of compliance. Maria was terrified, not just because she'd been forced out of her job, but because Ethan had managed to retrieve a few personal items from her locker at work, a small, inexpensive necklace and a picture of her grandson, and had sent them to her home with a note reading, "I hope you enjoy your break. I wouldn't want anything bad to happen to your family." This was the hallmark of a narcissist using veiled threats to assert absolute control, proving he was now monitoring anyone who dared to assist me. This calculated intimidation confirmed that Ethan's game had moved beyond Mark's blackmail and my eviction. He was actively destroying my emotional resources, ensuring I had no safe harbor or reliable witnesses left. He wasn't just obsessed with me. He was obsessed with dominating my entire reality, poisoning every relationship I held dear. The toxic ripple effect of his actions was designed to drive me back into his orbit, the only place he felt I belonged. I immediately transferred enough money to Maria to help her relocate and urged her to cut off all communication with the house, stressing that her safety and that of her grandson was paramount. Her sacrifice and her subsequent silencing only hardened my resolve. I realized I was fighting not just for my freedom, but for the principle of resisting a predator who used fear and manipulation as weapons. Ethan was closing the circle around me, but by driving away my allies, he had also given me a clear, documented pattern of his intimidation and obsession, which Liam could use to prove the dangerous environment he was creating. Liam, after hearing about the calculated intimidation of Maria, concluded that waiting for Ethan to make a legal move was too dangerous. We needed to deliver a decisive blow against his criminal blackmail and his toxic obsession simultaneously. He devised a high-risk plan that centered on finally breaching Mark's locked study. Believing the original uncoded files relating to the securities fraud, the true secret must be stored there, along with possibly more evidence of Ethan's long-term surveillance. I used the key to the main house I had obtained during my first dangerous visit, and, under the cover of a major storm hitting Charlottesville, I broke into the study through a seldom-used exterior window, the glass rattling violently in the high winds. The room was dark, and the atmosphere was thick with the scent of old paper and stale defeat, a fitting backdrop for the final, most devastating truth I was about to uncover. My goal was the hidden safe behind a bookshelf Mark always claimed contained old tax returns. It took agonizing minutes to open the small safe using the combination Mark used for everything our anniversary, a painful reminder of the life he so easily discarded. Inside, I found not just the original, damning documents detailing the full scope of the fraud, but a separate small box wrapped in black velvet. My hand trembled as I lifted the heavy lid, expecting a memory, but instead, I found the ultimate evidence of Mark's final, total betrayal. Inside the box were dozens of printouts of my personal emails, texts, and social media DMs, dating back nearly a year, all meticulously organized and clearly intercepted. This wasn't Ethan's doing alone. My stomach lurched as I read the chilling inscription on the inside lid. For our mutual protection. Mark had been actively monitoring my communications, or at the very least had received and kept the surveillance files from Ethan. He hadn't just sacrificed me. He was an active partner in my surveillance and his brother's toxic game. The shock was a physical blow. I didn't just feel heartbroken, I felt violated to my core. Mark hadn't been weak or afraid of Ethan. He had been complicit in the monitoring, using the materials to protect himself and his career, confirming his narcissistic preference for self-preservation over our marriage. The discovery of these files, the ultimate proof of his duplicity, was a deeper cut than the eviction itself, finalizing the shift from estranged wife to targeted victim. I snatched the files, the original fraud documents, and the damning black box, realizing I had just secured the evidence that would finally bring down both brothers. Ethan's obsession and Mark's betrayal were two sides of the same toxic coin, but now I had the leverage to expose their entire dark, criminal arrangement. Clutching the heavy box and the incriminating files, I turned to leave the study, only to find my path blocked by the towering, cold figure of Ethan. He must have slipped in through the back during the storm's loudest moments, drawn by some narcissistic instinct to patrol his territory. He stood leaning against the doorframe, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face, his eyes gleaming with the triumph of a man whose surveillance had paid off perfectly. He had been waiting for me to make this move all along. Looking for something, my name? He drawled, his voice a low, toxic whisper that cut through the storm's roar. I knew you couldn't stay away. You just can't resist my attention. His words confirmed his ultimate narcissistic delusion. He genuinely believed my trespass was motivated by a desire for him, not desperation for justice. He advanced slowly, his presence filling the room with a suffocating, possessive darkness, blocking my only exit and increasing the tension to an unbearable breaking point. I didn't flinch, summoning a courage I didn't know I possessed, channeling the rage from the hundreds of intercepted messages and Mark's pathetic compliance. I was looking for the evidence of the fraud he blackmailed Mark with and the proof of the toxic, criminal stalking you inflicted on me, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, holding up the black velvet box as proof. I found it all, Ethan. The game is over. His smile didn't fade. It widened into something terrifying, laced with pure arrogance. The game has just begun, darling. You forget I hold the ultimate power. You forget our secret, he purred, referring to the insinuation of the note. The one he knew could instantly destroy my credibility and ruin me emotionally. This was his final, most desperate emotional weapon, using the fear of shame to silence me. But I was no longer afraid of his threats. The realization of Mark's complete complicity had cauterized that wound. I stepped toward him, resolute, my eyes unwavering. The secret isn't mine anymore, Ethan. It's a police matter now. I have the files. I have the evidence of your fraud, your stalking, your intimidation of Maria. You lose. You have been exposed. The shock on his face was instantaneous and profound, the mask of the all-powerful narcissist finally cracking, replaced by raw, ugly panic. He lunged forward, not with violence, but with a desperate, pathetic grab for the files, confirming their damning power. But I was faster, slipping past him and running out of the study, leaving him scrambling on the floor, momentarily defeated. I knew this wasn't the end. He would retaliate viciously, but the tables had finally turned, and the predator was now cornered. I drove straight to Liam's office in Richmond, the evidence box clattering on the passenger seat like the death knell of the toxic empire Ethan had built. I handed over the original fraud documents, the intercepted files proving Mark's involvement in my surveillance, and the obscene note that encapsulated Ethan's terrifying obsession. Liam worked through the night, coordinating with federal authorities, and within 48 hours, the warrants were issued, turning the slow, agonizing process of betrayal into a swift, devastating reckoning. The news broke quietly but with destructive force. Mark was immediately questioned regarding the securities fraud, and the evidence of his complicity, including his failure to report Ethan's criminal activity and his active concealment of the surveillance, sealed his fate as an accomplice. Ethan, confronted with the full documentation of his narcissistic blackmail, stalking, and Maria's intimidation, was taken into custody. The arrogant, triumphant look finally wiped from his face by the cold reality of the law. The toxic game had finally reached its end. The ensuing weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, testifying, and dealing with the inevitable financial fallout, but I was shielded by Liam's expertise and my cooperation with the authorities, eventually receiving full immunity. The public fallout was immense, particularly for the powerful family in Charlottesville, but my focus remained on rebuilding my life from the rubble the brothers had left behind. Mark eventually filed for divorce from jail, a cold, final act that I signed without a second thought, finally free of the legal and emotional bondage. I sold the house in Charlottesville, choosing to donate the profits to a local women's shelter focused on helping victims of psychological abuse and stalking, finding a profound sense of closure and turning the symbol of my trauma into a source of support for others. I moved far away, seeking a fresh start in a quiet, anonymous life away from the pervasive shadow of the brothers' darkness, understanding that freedom was not just physical, but also emotional. The most profound lesson I took from this dark chapter was the realization that your peace is your most valuable asset, and no debt, no ambition, and no twisted familial obligation is worth sacrificing your sense of self and your safety. I learned to recognize the subtle, insidious signs of narcissism and emotional abuse, realizing that toxicity often masquerades as charm or ambition until it's too late. My husband chose his brother's silence and his own career over me, and I chose my freedom and my truth over silence. My life was irrevocably changed, scarred by the betrayal and the dark obsession, but I survived the toxicity and emerged stronger, more aware, and fiercely protective of my boundaries. I finally understood that the secret Ethan had tried to hold over me, the truth about my trauma, was actually my greatest source of strength, enabling me to walk away from the darkness and claim my own power. Thank you for joining me until the end. I hope my story gives you the strength to recognize and break free from your own toxic battles. Subscribe to the channel to help me bring more stories and encourage me. Until next time.